Hello, and welcome to Let's Talk Transformation. This is a podcast where we go beneath the surface of leadership and of change. And in a world where complexity is now the norm and uncertainty is accelerating, being calm and cultivating stillness has indeed become a leadership superpower. Today, I'm joined by Anthony Abbagnano, founder of ASHA, the Alchemy School of Healing Arts, and also Alchemy of Breath, and also the author of the deeply reflective, refreshingly honest, and very practical book, Outer Chaos, Inner Calm. Anthony, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Susie. It's a pleasure to be here. Oh my,
It's an absolute pleasure to have you. Anthony, your center, which is located in Tuscany, Italy, is dedicated to a community that works together for emerging consciousness, and your personal journey into the, I'm going to put it in inverted commas, into the messiness of transformation started in your 50s when you had the awakening that you weren't living your best life and that you needed to literally take a breath before moving on. So can we start there? In introduction to your book, you talk about this little town in Tuscany and meeting the wise elders of the village. And you state, I gained a rare insight then, that it's not until the last part of our lives that we understand the size of the frame we have lived in. I'm just going to let that resonate. It's not until the last part of our lives that we understand the size of the frame we have lived in. Tell us more about this insight and how it's shaped your work and your thinking, Anthony, because I had to read it a couple of times and it definitely shifted something in me. So over to you.
thank you. It's interesting because I was in a class this morning. There were about 50 of us in the room, and I asked, how many people have had it happen that someone comes and says something to you, which is a compliment that you kind of knew, but you couldn't take? They come up to you and say,
Yes.
"Gosh, you said that. It just changed everything for me." And then you kind of go, "Oh, no, not me." you know it's one of those moments, I think, that we really don't honestly appraise how
Mm,
much power we have as
mm,
human beings. And we do accept that being small and meek
yes.
is um, is perhaps a better way. And it's understandable because it's difficult. That tall poppy syndrome says that if you stick out too much, you're going to get your head chopped off. So we do learn to live in a frame, I believe, that's smaller than the actual size of the picture we are, the
Mm,
actual size that we are. And I
mm,
think also there's something else to that. My brother said to me before he died, why is it that what people are proud of in the first 2 or 3 decades of their lives are often the things they need to keep secret in the last half of their lives? And that's stuck with me ever since he said that. And that has meaning for me too,
mm,
because we do in those more youthful years where it's like we're given the key to a Ferrari and we're 5 years old. I mean, men have got all this testosterone, women have their equivalents, and we
of
just,
course.
yeah, we surge forward in life without really knowing where the steering wheel is and how to navigate, or where the brakes are. And, we only find out because we trip up and fall over.
Mm,
Um, so I think there's something about forgive us for we know not what we do that actually also is relevant. That
mm,
when we realize the frame that we have lived in and that there's another one that
mm,
we can occupy, that
mm,
journey to making that peaceful and happy and possible.
mm. And I really like the analogy of the Ferrari. So my 14-year-old son that would be his today's dream if I
Yeah.
gifted him a Ferrari. But it's really telling when you think past that and think, yeah, so he does know where the steering wheel is. I know that he's really into cars, but I'm not sure he'd know how to drive it or where to drive it. And there's an anecdote at the end of your book when you talk about a compliment that you got when you accepted it and it made you feel warm because of the impact you were clearly having on others and not the more ego-driven
Yeah.
reaction of, oh, oh yeah, I'm impressing people. I've got to be impressive, I've got to be performing. And I think that's the wisdom that comes from this inner work, isn't it? So I love the idea of a poppy standing out taller because it's still congruous with nature. It's just growing in its own way. Um, so if I look at understanding the frame we're living in, your book is emphasizing the importance of breath work. And of course, that's the first thing we do when we enter this world, all of us. Um, and you talk about the fact that breath work became your biggest ally on your journey. And I love the quote from one of your students that emotional resilience is actually the ability to take a conscious breath when you don't want to. That really made me stop and think. And I thought, okay, and I don't think I give enough power or notice breathing enough. So I would love for you to give us more insight into why breathwork is such a powerful tool for healing and for self-discovery. And I remember before the show we were chatting and you said, actually, I struggled with it. That's why I teach it.
Yeah.
So can we can we start with that paradox because it really spoke to me.
Yeah, well, I do. That's exactly why I teach it. I get to talk about it all the time, and it's one of the ways that I create intimacy with it. It's one of the ways that I make the existence of breath in my life significant
Mm,
and normal. That significance becomes normal rather than the normal that most of us have learnt to live with, which is to forget about it except when there's not enough and then to curse it because it's not there. So, I think that it all does begin
mm,
with one breath. It began with that first breath that
mm,
we took. And I think that first breath that we took is worthy of a lifetime of study. All the significance and all the things that were happening in a physiological sense, in a metaphysical sense, and also in a supernatural sense,
mm.
or a spiritual sense.
Yes.
So it's such a big moment to probably the only moment that we ever embrace life with no reserve at all. We haven't been hurt, hopefully. The birth
Mm,
has happened, but we've come into life and we just have this amazing sense of wonder and curiosity, and we're inhaling something that could be poison, but we don't care. We don't know. This is life force, and bring it in, bring it on, and it kickstarts us into this human experience. So I think you could make movies about this moment, and make a serial out of
mm,
50 different um, 50 different series about it,
mm.
because it when the more you contemplate it, the more it means and the more questions it brings. And so that's just the first breath of life. And then consider the last breath of life.
Mm,
And, altrettanto, as we say in Italian, it's the same thing. It's time to let go.
yes.
It's time to let go of everything we've clung on to, everything we've held valuable, everything, every debt we've got, everything that we've struggled for. It all gets to be released with that last breath. So what does that surrender actually look like? And how curious can we be about that now?
Mm,
And then of course we're not. We
yeah.
forget in between those two, the only ones that are striking to us are when we lose our breath.
Mm,
So but I think that one breath and that emotional resilience, and I like to think emotional intelligence also
mm,
being our ability to take a breath when we don't want to. And
yes.
the reason I say that is because I think it was Rumi that said it's just one crack in the door that will
Yes.
let the light in. And that's what we're doing when we take that breath. We're taking a situation that is might be being put upon us. It might
Mm,
be something that we didn't think we created or we didn't want, but we're in a pickle, right? We're in some
mm,
kind of pickle. We're feeling anxious or argumentative or angry, or something is happening to make the adrenaline and the epinephrine and the cortisol start to surge around our system. And that's the time when we actually lose our choices. That's the
mm,
time all our processing power goes back to the back of the brain, the reptilian, the
yeah.
survival brain, and our frontal lobe then begins to lose its processing power. And
Mm,
so the higher that tension becomes, the less likely we are to feel a sense of choice. And
Mm,
that goes all the way back to trauma and panic and those experiences that a lot of us have, I believe everybody has experienced to one degree or another,
yeah.
and that that we don't know how to cope with. We just go back to that simple flight, freeze, or fight.
Hmm.
And so our choices are reduced to those three, and they're
Mm,
kind of automated. That's not a thinking process. So when people ask me, okay, I suffer from anxiety, I can't maintain a good relationship with my brother or wife
mm,
or husband, whatever it is.
mm,
I tend to lose my temper. And they say, what breath can I use when I'm losing my temper? What breath can I use when I'm feeling anxiety? And I
mm.
say, well, there are several breaths that you can use, but the most important time to practice them is when you're not in an escalating situation.
Yeah.
So that when that escalating situation does come, that you know it's there, it's familiar to you, and you can lean into it. You can pick
Mm,
it up as your tool for that moment. So I think that's one major takeaway is breath practices need to be done out of the context in which they're so useful.
yeah.
And once we get that down, then all we've got to do is to make that a fourth choice when we're under pressure. So instead of fight, flight, or freeze, we've got fight, flight, freeze, or
Or
breathe.
breathe.
And so,
Nice.
and then if we can choose the breathe, and we'll probably miss it the first few times and go, oh, I
Mm,
would have taken a breath then. But then when we do take it, we realize, oh,
mm,
I'm I'm actually now becoming causative in my life experience. Instead of feeling cramped or pressured or overwhelmed, I'm actually now participating in a different solution.
mm,
We talk about the breath workers talk about the parasympathetic nervous
mm.
system,
Yeah.
sympathetic nervous system. And the way I like to describe it is really very simple that the sympathetic nervous system is one that is overly sympathetic with the outside world.
Nice. Yes,
The
absolutely.
parasympathetic one is the one that's actually not sympathetic with what's going on. It's actually something that we can establish by, in this case, the conscious use of our breath.
Mm,
So if we're over resonating with a disaster outside us or some outer force that's
mm,
towards us, the best thing we can do is start to regulate our parasympathetic nervous system.
mm,
Stop it being so nervous.
mm. And I like this idea of creating space. For me, breathing is really about creating space in what is personally, and I believe in our today's society, an overwhelmed, very busy, too busy system
Yeah.
where we come from a place of scarcity and not a place of abundance. Um, even what we do in leadership development and things like that in organizations, it comes from a place of self-improvement. We don't do self-unfoldment. We don't stop to see what may emerge. And we don't essentially breathe. So I often wonder, well, clearly we do breathe, Anthony, but you know what I mean. We don't consciously use our breath to regulate either our parasympathetic system or this or what's going on outside. But it brings me to the idea of children, because I have done that with my son when he was small, helping him to regulate his breathing when he's hurt himself or when he's upset. And you mentioned the concept of the inner child
Mm.
and how connecting or reconnecting, shall I say, with our inner child can transform our lives.
Yeah.
And I wholly believe that. And you have a process by which we can do this and also step into this way of being. Can you walk us through the bridge technique and how it works? I found it incredibly helpful, Anthony, and the acronym, of course, makes it memorable when you're trying to remember it in the first time when you're forming the habit. Oh, what do I do first? What's this for? And then it just flows, which is nice, and it creates that space in your system.
Yeah, thank you. And that's a great question, by the way. You said a lot
Mhm.
there.
I
I'm
did, sorry.
distilling and settle. No, thank you. I love the challenge. Um, okay, the bridge is an inner child retrieval system. And I think before I go through the letters, I just need to say, why would
Mm,
we even need it? There might be people listening who are saying, inner child, what would that mean? Um, there was an American television uh, compere called Mr. Roberts, and he used to do children's programs. And he said, the inner child is in me still, and sometimes he's not so still. And
nice.
that's the part in us that
Mm,
is joyful and playful. And there are times that we giggle. The last time you giggled and couldn't stop.
mm,
Those sorts of that sense of boundlessness and
mm,
that sense of freedom. And they're actually quite rare moments.
mm.
We don't I don't get, we don't really get them every day.
No.
We get them spontaneously and for some unexplainable reason, we're giggling uselessly and just really loving it.
Yeah.
And it's wonderfully pointless.
Mm. I think. Yeah.
Yes. So um, that's the plus side of the inner child that lives in all of us. The tough side of the inner child that lives in all of us is that for each time that we've been wounded or shamed or abused in any way, physically, emotionally, in any kind of abuse,
Mm,
we first of all lose our breath.
yes.
And, and that's when the trauma, the impact of the trauma then becomes embodied. So it lives in our body. And I'll come back to that in a second,
Mm,
but because we use our body as I go through the explanation of how this works. But what happens because we don't want to remember the pain of the accident or the incident,
mm,
we dissociate from it. I don't want to remember that in my life. That was too painful. I couldn't deal with it then. I can't deal with it now. So I'm just going to dissociate from it. And
mm.
that's either conscious or unconscious. But what actually happens at the same time is we throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Literally.
Almost literally, that inner baby that we, if I was 3 years old or 7 years old,
Mm,
I don't want to remember the incident. I inadvertently cast away or discard
mm,
that part of who I once was. And when you think about how many times we were shamed or didn't feel good enough or were
mm.
shocked or were abused in our childhood, you can imagine how many fragments of who we are
Yeah.
have actually been left behind in our past. And we don't want to remember the instance, so we're not going to deal with this. We're going to
Yeah.
leave them there. And so that asks questions of, okay, well, how much is left? We talk about presence of mind. We talk about presence as a
Mm,
concept. How present can I possibly be if 50,000 shards of my being have been hidden behind a trauma that I don't want to deal with? I don't want
mm,
to remember. And so, how can we restore? How can we reclaim? How can we repair these parts that have been separate? And so the bridge is a system to do that. It's,
mm.
as I said earlier, an inner child retrieval system, and it's very straightforward. It's almost ridiculously simple and very powerful
Mm.
because we can all do it.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not complex. We don't have to go to school to learn this. I can see people's lives change in 35 minutes and they suddenly the penny drops and everything changes for them. So it's a huge transformational opportunity. And what's involved, as you said, it's an acronym. So the B means to get a commitment from my client to breathe. We're going
Hmm.
to use breath. So B is for breathe. R is for recognize, and that recognition is that these parts are actually separate from me. They're not incorporated. They're
Mm.
not integrated into who I am. I've isolated them because they're too painful. I think the trauma is too painful. So but what we're going to do here is we're going to save the inner child. We're not going to go back to the trauma. We don't need to go back to the trauma.
Mm.
It's like how many times have you seen someone walking down the street and they trip over something in the sidewalk and they look back at the sidewalk like it was its fault
It's
and it
fault.
wasn't their
Yeah.
fault, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
and likewise, if I hit my hand with a thumber, with a with a thumber,
With
if
a
I hit my thumb,
thumb.
um, am I going to look at the hammer and blame the hammer? No, I'm going to
Mm,
fix the wound. I'm
mm,
going to learn to fix my own wound to heal it. And this is what the invitation is with the bridge, is actually to become the agent of our own repair, our own healing, instead of waiting for someone else to do it for us. So that can only happen if we recognize that there is a separation, that,
mm.
okay, yeah, there is a part of me that doesn't have fun anymore. And every time my wife talks to me in that voice, I think it's my mother before she's about to hit me, and I'm getting all activated and fearful, and then I get angry with my wife, and things go wrong. And think of all those times in your life that you know you're going to say something stupid, but by George, you're going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
And that's the moment that we can actually
Mm,
transform.
mm,
So I use my breath. I recognize that there's a part of me that's not present with me
mm,
and probably pulling my puppet strings and making me behave in all kinds of inconvenient ways,
mm.
because that's what it learned to do at the
Yeah.
time. I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
4, whatever it was. So with that recognition, then I get my breather or my client to settle into their body. And I ask them, well, what is that feeling that you've carried all your life
Mm,
since this incident happened? Where do you feel it in your body? Because we can't just rely on this to sort these things out. The brain
yeah.
is not the ultimate instrument. So 80% of the data is going this way,
Yeah.
20% going that way. So
Yeah.
let's access the other 80% and see what it's got to say. So I
Mm,
invite people to just close your eyes, take a breath, and when you connect with this feeling, allow this feeling to be here, because you're used to shoving it aside. But just allow for a few moments, allow the feeling and breathe as you allow it, knowing that as you breathe, it won't overtake you, it won't drown you. You're in the witness place when you breathe. You're not over, you won't over-identify. So as you breathe, notice where this feeling lives in your body. And most people will say it's somewhere between the throat
mm,
and the belly, just
yeah.
above the pubic bone, down
Mm,
down to the bottom of the belly. And so that's what we work with. That's the part of the body that we work with. And then we come to the I of the word bridge. And with the I, what I'm going to do is I'm going to inquire, I'm going to investigate with this breather, or if you're doing this practice for yourself, to investigate this sensation in the body more deeply. So it's a moment of incredible focus and concentration. And I use the breath to help me focus, or I help my client focus with their breath. And I encourage them to notice some kind of imagery or sensation or awareness of that little one
mm,
in that little one was suffering in that moment. Doesn't matter what the
mm,
moment was, is what's important is to connect to the feelings of that little one inside. And this always engenders an emotional moment for people, because they remember the pain, and that
mm,
pain is part of who they are. But we don't need to amp up the pain. We don't need to be dramatic. What we need to do is make contact with this little one. So, what I do is I have them witness this little being inside them, and they explain, oh, I can see her hiding under a table, or
mm,
he's sitting in the corner looking at the wall, or whatever it might be. And then I'm going to say, okay, so just take a couple of breaths and really observe the difficulty that she is in. And ask yourself, or I'm asking you, what would you want her to know? As you, if you were to speak to her from where you are today,
mm,
with your awareness and your intelligence of today, what would you want her to know? And invariably, it's, I wanted to know that I can deal with this. I've
mm,
got her back. I can save her. I want her in my life. It wasn't fair what happened to her. I'll protect her. I
mm,
love her. I'm sorry I haven't protected her earlier. I'm sorry I've blamed the outer world for something that I could have attended to myself.
mm,
And so then I asked the key question, which is, will you say it to her out loud? And this is the
Yeah.
pivotal moment
Hard.
of the whole process because
Mm.
most people will be shy, right? Like
Of
I don't
course.
like,
Of
you
course.
just kooky and a stuff. Get out of here, kind of thing. But actually, and it was Fritz Perls that said this in the 70s, I believe, of the last century, that the more resistance there is, actually, the more potential exists. So
Mm.
I always greet, if there is any resistance, I greet it willingly. And I say, I really appreciate that you're resistant. And that's why it's important for you to say it in front of me. And so eventually they will. And then the whole tension breaks.
Mm.
Actually, the task is the main body of the task is actually accomplished. So I just make sure they're thorough in the things they want to say, that they really mean what they're going to do, they mean what they're saying, and is genuine. And usually this is sometimes a tearful
Mm.
event,
Of course.
it's a relief.
Mm.
You see the shoulders drop, and oh my God. And because the work is really done. And so the G of the word bridge is really about gathering this little one, taking a few breaths and realizing and appreciating what you've done. This is a
Mm.
huge thing that you've done. You've made contact with this little part of you that you probably pretended most of your life didn't even exist. So,
Mm.
you're now creating a whole new normal, something completely different is on the scales right now. And to make it last, I want you to just take a few breaths and settle into this being normal. This is
Mm.
actually a new normal. Let it become familiar.
Mm.
And so these breaths that might last a minute or 3 minutes, just calm, gentle breaths that are really about recognizing, oh my God, I've done this. And
Mm.
this is now a part of me that can belong. So I may encourage them to bring their arms to their heart or their chest or anything that for them signifies the reunion of these two parts of themselves, their
Mm.
current awareness and who they once were. That could be a pillow, it could be a cushion, could be any prop that you
Mm.
need that helps the body remind the
Yes, the
mind
mind. Yeah.
that this is actually real and it's happening. And so at that point, then we come to the E of the word bridge. And the E, I didn't used to I didn't know it was going to be called the bridge when I first
Of
started with this over a decade
course.
ago.
Yeah.
But the E is for exercise, and I understood this because people would come to me and I'd kind of inadvertently go through this process. It didn't have an acronym or anything, and then they would call me up a few days later and saying, "I need to see you again. It hasn't quite. I want to go over this again. Something else has come up, and I'm not feeling I can't quite manage it."
Mm.
So I realized, okay, they're not strengthening. This is an experience of clarity for them, but it's not leaving them in a way that they can empower themselves even
Mm.
more. So
Mm.
then I understood that what needed to happen, and when I looked at all the inner child work that exists, I saw it as majorly lacking
Mm.
a repetitive exercise that will prove to this inner child
Mm.
that I'm real,
Mm.
that actually I will keep showing up and I will protect you and you can trust me. So I ask myself questions like, is it any wonder that a child that's been ignored in a stinky old fridge with the plug pulled out without her breath, for 35 years
Mm.
would trust me all of a sudden just because I say I love you?
Mm.
That might not be enough. So what we need to do is construct a system that is reassuring and repetitive. And repetition is one of the ways that we can reinform the subconscious.
Mm.
And hardly anything more repetitive than our breath.
Yes.
So I encourage people to make that exercise if they can, something about the breath. And in my class this morning, the lady said, when I go into the woods, and I go into nature every day as a support system for me. When I go into the woods, I'm going to remember her. I'm going to pick up a
Mm.
flower and I'm going to remember her. And I
Mm.
said, that's great. Now that's wonderful and creative and fun. And I feel like I want to ask you to say, what are you going to do first thing in the morning? And she said, "Yeah, I get you." I said, she said, "I'm going to take 3 breaths every morning.
Mm.
And those 3 breaths are going to be about bringing her into awareness." And that felt strong enough to me, not just the one
Yes.
because it's raining and she wouldn't go in the woods that day, or all
Mm.
kinds of things can happen that
Mm.
could stop that. So I wanted it to be super simple, but repetitive. And so that's how we ended our session this morning.
Excellent. And I think this whole idea of finding the model that works for you, understanding the feeling and the technique, and then clearly you don't change habits in a day. So I think it's really important to operationalize our learning, but also our somatic learning. Because if I come back to what you said, Anthony, about 20% happens up here and 80% happens down here, I would imagine that 90% of us are only using 20% of our capacity
Yeah.
um, to understand and to live. If I come back to the idea of how big the frame is. So I think the idea of this being like any other thing you learn, so learning, well, if I take my, learning to ride a bike, learning to play the cello, learning French, it is a repetitive and disciplined process.
Yeah.
And I think once it's been acknowledged, like you say, people think it's a little bit woo-woo. It's like, oh, what are you talking about? But most of the time I talk to leaders about what I call the stories we tell ourselves, which are essentially about how we've built those processes to protect ourselves from lots of things and the formatting we've received. So I love the idea of intercepting that process and co-creating something different, if you like, with that part of us. Um, because I think one of the biggest things about managing complexity and uncertainty is this balance of I don't feel safe anyway, so I'm just going to stick to the familiar. And your invitation here, uh, and the bridge technique, which can help us not only reconnect but also balance this being and doing. So sitting with the uncomfortable,
Yeah.
um, and surrendering, because you tell us transformation isn't about control, it's about surrendering. So letting go of lots of things. But if I bring it back to an organizational context, letting go of the need to understand, to plan, to do reporting dashboards, but also letting go maybe of my perceived identity in the organization, of being sure of what my next career step is. And, so many of us wear masks.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and I would really love your insight on what has been the most surprising thing that emerged when you began to release your masks and what you see in your work when people actually consciously are present and release their masks.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, it's such a tender moment.
Mm,
It's such a private moment.
yes.
So it's a completely individual and personal moment for
Mm,
each of
mm,
and um I want to use the breath as an analogy because I find it so relevant and so valuable. We need our will to breathe out. And sorry, to breathe in. We need
mm,
our will to breathe in. And we need to surrender to breathe out. We're actually doing this all the time.
mm,
We live in a world that believes that willfulness prevails. But I can only breathe in so far. I can't use my will to keep breathing eternally
mm,
inwards. I'm going to have to surrender so I can use my will again. So when, especially in a work environment, and I had the opportunity to speak to the Society of Human Resources Management a few weeks ago in California, and to be able to talk with people who are in fully embedded in corporate life. I mean, this is a third of their lives minimum
yes, minimum, yeah.
day, and then all the other thoughts and the
Mm,
sleepless nights and the rushing the rest of life, get the kids to school so I could go back into this environment again at enormous personal cost. I mean,
mm,
enormous personal cost. That burnout is now what we call it normal. All our immune systems are are decreasing in their efficiency. Autoimmune
Mm.
attack is now beginning to happen more and more frequently.
Yeah.
Viruses get more and more threatening. We're not we're not resilient. We're not robust. And so if we can learn, I mean, if we could only learn when to use the will and when to use the surrender,
It sounds
we
so
have
simple.
it. Yeah, and it's so ridiculous because we're
Mm.
doing it 10 times a minute anyway. We're willfully breathing in and surrendering to an exhale. So there's a like I said before, it's worth a lifetime of study. But we associate surrender with weakness. We associate
Yes.
surrender with giving up.
Yeah.
Um, for me, I was forced into surrender.
Hmm.
I I chose it. I chose it eventually. It was probably about the only choice left in that moment.
Mm.
But I had parasites. I didn't know that I had them. I picked them up in on a journey to the Far East,
Hmm.
and I got extremely ill, and no one could diagnose it. No one could find out what was wrong. And I got
Wow.
to the point where all I could do, I couldn't move. It was too painful to move a limb or twitch a finger or cough or laugh or even smiling hurt. I just had to lay as still as I possibly could day after day for about 7 or 8 weeks.
Wow.
And I even had to kind of fool my body that I wasn't breathing because if I expanded my lungs, it would start the whole
Hurt.
pain.
Wow.
So every time I'd react to the pain and tighten up, more pain would come. So I tried to negotiate this for weeks. Like, how can I get around this?
Mm.
How can I prevail? How can I use my will to get rid of this? How can how can I kick it aside? How can I
Mm.
go, how can I power my way, and all of these things. And I couldn't.
Mm.
My body was asking me to be in zero movement. And I began to get familiar with what that meant. But I'd still like, oh, oh no, and you start and it all kicks off the whole thing again. So the cost of not paying attention to the need to
Huge.
surrender was so great. And
Yeah.
so it was like a mallet hitting my head each time.
Mm.
So I had no choice. I mean,
Mm.
of course I made the choice, but it was like
Mm.
uh, I really had to let go.
Mm.
And when I did, I could achieve a pain-free state, even though my body was still degrading and was like pretty much at the end of my life. I was probably a week or 10 days away from the end of my life,
Wow.
but but I was able to stop. How often have we stopped in our
Mm.
life? How has it ever happened? If it did, it was probably because of an accident and we were unconscious or something like that. But have we ever consciously stayed in stillness and understood what that is? It's like wiping your whole slate clean and giving yourself another chance. If you can stop, then before you start, you can look at different ways that you can start and how you can re-employ your sense of purpose and your sense of will and your possibilities.
Mm.
None of them are visible if we're stuck in the trough of will. If we're still insisting that I've got to get my reports in, like you said, I've got to do my Slack, I've got to
Mm.
do my Monday doc or Notion, whatever it is, I've got to make sure it's all done because if I don't, the tension's going to get even worse and I'm going to cause problems for other people. People, if there's that person that doesn't really want me in this job anyway, all this stuff is
Yeah.
going on in this environment. And actually, we need to create some calm in the middle
Yeah.
of it.
And we sort of shoehorn meditation into that because we have to do that as well. It's a thing on the to-do list. It's like, I've done 5 minutes meditation. I don't feel better, but I will do. Blah, 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 blah.
That's right. The
Mm.
time we need it is the time we're least likely to use it,
Mm.
and we don't have time for it.
Mm.
So it all starts with that one breath.
Yeah. And it's hidden resources though, isn't it? I mean, I was already convinced, Anthony, but hearing you speak, it just brings it back to me about the innate wisdom our body holds
Oh,
and that we don't listen to it enough or not at all. And, if we can't formulate things or we decide not to, the body does. And I think the whole idea of embodied leadership, so being consciously present and actually using the wisdom that your own body can bring you in terms of how you're showing up
Yeah.
is really important. How would you advise leaders to try and step into that practice? Because sometimes they could do body scans. I've seen groups that do body scans at the beginning of meetings, and or they invite people to take a breath to land in the meeting, which is already a good start. But just like the inner child discussion, it's not going to happen overnight. So, what would your advice be there?
Well, I think, first of all, I work on the principle that it's an inside job.
Yeah,
So if
totally.
we want the world outside us to change, it starts right here.
Mm,
Um, I had a question in the class this morning, but how do I, if I do my inner child work and I do my inner work and I attend to my inner gym, my inner
yeah,
work,
yeah.
then how do I engage with the outside world? What do I do? How do I do that?
It's a great question.
And I think that it is a great question because we're in such a doing state of mind,
Yes.
a willful state of mind. So of course we're going to willfully find out how does this work? What buttons do I press? How
Yes.
far I have to go, So but actually it's not about doing. This
Mm,
this journey is about two words, being and enough. It's about understanding that we are actually enough and
mm,
letting go of this limiting belief that we're not good enough
mm.
and that I'm going to have to fake this in order to pull it off, which we kind of all get to look at. You spoke about personas
Yes.
earlier on, and we unconsciously slip into these characters, the salesman, the managing director,
Yes.
the humble, the humble tea person or whatever it is, and they become our identity. What we
Mm,
identify with becomes our identity. And if we get like I'm a teacher and if I was to believe the story that I tell myself that I'm a teacher, so I know more
mm.
than you, then what do I become? I become the
Mm,
shell of what I would like to be. I become actually the opposite of what I'd like to be. And the truth is, I think I learn much more from my students than they learn from me. So,
mm,
I don't think I'm that. It doesn't work for me as a label.
mm,
So if we're willing to question the labels that we've given ourselves as we walk through the world, and if we're willing to do the work to start to uncover the beauty of who we really are underneath. I mean, I know, I know in the business world, some of these words are a bit risky, but we are walking miracles as
yes.
human beings. We are walking miracles. It took 35 trillion sperm to
Mm,
meet the egg at exactly the right time for you to be born. That makes you a miracle.
mm,
We can own that. We can own that and understand that you didn't have to do anything to be a miracle. You just are a miracle. Now, if you look at yourself with as if you have miraculous resources, what would you do with those? What
yeah.
would you do if you were Clark Kent and you had your cape and you could jump over the other side of the world? Because you can
Mm,
in many ways. You can achieve quantum growth, quantum domain over your own life, and quantum play,
mm,
playing life, having fun with it, it being enjoyable. And so I think that's what's on offer. So what I said to this person was, it's not what you're going to do, it's what you're going to become. And you're going to notice that when you become that, if you own that, if you admit it, i.e., give it admission into your awareness, if
mm,
you will admit that it's true, your light is going to shine so brightly. Just like when I asked that question, has anybody had someone come up to them and thank them and they've been surprised or embarrassed?
mm,
That's not going to be an embarrassing moment. That's going to be a moment of truth. It's
yeah.
going to be a moment of recognition because you are already leading and you're already influencing other people. All we're talking about right now is becoming more aware of it instead
Mm,
of reading books, finding systems,
yeah.
and is how I deal with the management issue, or this is
mm,
how I deal with whatever problem may present itself.
mm,
So I'm used to working with CEOs and founders
yeah,
and upper management, and I've seen people have to reckon with themselves.
of
And
course.
it takes courage. And yet, when you see what happens afterwards, I have one man who's become a dear friend who was a CEO and founder of a software company in California, and it sold for $28 billion. And
Okay,
he then started a foundation to help university invest in university students with startups to do good in the world. Because of what I did with him, he is now using breath and breath work there are 100 universities around the world he's doing this with. So there are 200 newborn entrepreneurs that are coming into the world that are using breath work in the boardroom.
brilliant.
And they're communicating with each other and they're
Mm,
caring for each other, because a team that breathes together thrives together. They
totally.
they want to help each other. They
Mm,
want you to reach your highest potential. It may be bigger than mine. I want you to get there.
yeah.
And that's what this type of awareness changes.
Mm. Yeah, and I think building a culture of care, as you say, is seen as a softer thing, but it's actually a competitive advantage. And like you say, when you see somebody shift or somebody shifts, often I get the question, has he had coaching? Has she been having coaching? Because they're somewhere else and they show up differently and their energy
Yeah.
is very differently. And I love the idea of stillness and personal rituals being inner technologies, if you like. And I have a lot of discussion around tech savvy. What does it mean? What do we need to understand, particularly with generative AI? For me, that's sort of the wrong discussion. Not sort of, that is the wrong question. But we're still talking about being savvy, but it's about the technologies of being human, if you like. And everyone always goes, "Oh yeah, well, yeah, I'll do some course," or they do that in the leadership development. I'll look at it then. But as we've said, it's a practice, and it needs to be practiced before you need it. So, what are some of the micro practices, Anthony, if you could give us a couple that have helped you cultivate inner calm and that you have seen others react to or even customize to their way of cultivating inner calm, particularly in the busy, higher levels of organizations where showing vulnerability and really showing up as you are is not necessarily encouraged. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I wouldn't want anybody to have to make the journey I made to get where I got.
Mm.
So that a lot of my practices were wrong. I found out by hitting the wall,
Yeah.
and a lot of having to negotiate a lot of suffering in my
Mm,
life, um, and self-hatred too. So I come to this with the wish to save people the trouble of having to do that.
mm,
That it doesn't
nice.
actually need
Yeah.
such a devastating, this midlife crisis
Mm,
concept
mm,
is really a midlife opportunity. And if we begin to, what happens in life, unfortunately, is that what we build to protect us because we've been wounded
mm,
becomes the prison that we live in. So we use these personas, we build
mm,
these shells, we have these layers of forgetting the traumas and the difficulties, and then who are we? We're hidden, we're no longer present. So this process of becoming present is actually much more simple than the stories that we tell ourselves, from my perspective. And my tool is the breath.
mm,
So when you take that one breath, ask yourself, do you need another one? Ask yourself, do you need another 10?
yeah.
And during those 10 breaths, what else will come into your awareness? You mentioned earlier on, Susie, the unknown, the ability to be in the unknown. And
Mm,
I think this is such an important element that you brought in here, because when we're unsure, when we're confused, is when there's the most possibility, right? Yet
yeah.
we're ashamed of confusion. We
Mm,
we organize it and we give it containers like the double diamond approach in business
yes.
and
Yes.
all of these things, to make it safe.
Mm,
Actually, in that first stage of that creative moment is pandemonium, right? Everybody's popping out with an idea here or there, and we just have to have them all on the table. We just have to be in
Mm,
that chaotic moment, and there is a moment that it's useful, and then we refine and whittle down and prune and so on. But my advice is that the breath is the answer. The breath is your best friend. And I'm not being woo-woo here. You know exactly what it feels like when you don't have enough.
mm,
You know exactly how desperate you get. You know exactly when you're panicking and how you're breathing. But now you know, and you can't unknow that you can change that.
mm,
You have the power to change that. So if I'm feeling panicky and I want to calm down, I need to breathe a calming breath. And the best way to get used to that calming breath is right now when you aren't panicking. So when you do, you'll remember where it is. It's like buying a tool for nice shiny tool for your toolkit,
mm,
and then you'll know where it is in the box. You can just immediately reach for it and use it.
mm,
You know, become familiar with your breath. It's to me, it's more important than my wife, than my children, than my dogs, but anybody that I love. The breath is number one because without the breath, I couldn't love any
mm,
of them.
mm.
So, I just can't overemphasize that. So, what is the practice you asked?
Yes.
Here's a fun practice. Do 3 minutes of conscious breathing in the morning. Breathe through your nose and breathe nice, big, robust breaths. Take a pen and paper or a keyboard if that's your way,
Mm,
and free write. Free write whatever comes into your head, even if it's, I've got nothing to say, I can't think of anything to say,
okay.
nothing to mind. Write it and commit to not stopping. Set an alarm on your clock for 10 minutes. Do that. That's essential because if you don't, you'll keep looking at your watch and checking. Just
Okay.
set the alarm, set it for 10 minutes and free write. And then put it away. Don't even read it. It's junk. It's rubbish. Don't even worry about it.
Mm,
Next week, do the same thing. Do it for 7 days. And then after 7 days, look at what you've written. And what you'll find is there's jewelry in the junk.
oh,
Because,
nice.
right, I don't want you to be creative. You don't have to say the right thing. You can say the same word 60 times. You can misspell it. Your handwriting can be terrible. That's not the point. The point is
Mm,
to be in the flow. Get in the flow. And when you get in the flow, things happen. So then when you look back at it after a week's period of time, you can really, oh God, there's some real nuggets in there. If
mm,
I put those nuggets together, now I'm realizing I have creativity. I've just created an opportunity to acknowledge my own creativity.
mm,
When you bring that creativity to your work environment or to your relationship or to a life that might seem a little repetitive or dull, different things can happen.
mm. Thank you. Thank you, Anthony. And thank you for sharing that. And it reminds me of the parting handshake, the symbolic handshake that you talk about in your book. So in keeping with that of, passing something on, I'm going to leave our listeners with that idea, but also the symbolic handshake it represents to symbolize and remind us that transformation isn't just about strategy or systems or ways of working, it's about our souls. And if you're navigating complexity or if you're leading through change, I think, or simply trying to connect, to stay connected to what matters, I think outer chaos, inner calm is an invitation to come home to yourself. And I would like to leave our listeners with one of the quotes that resonates the most for me from your book, which is be the architect of your own soul. So thank you, Anthony, for sharing your wisdom and your practices and your journey with us.
You're very, very welcome, and I'm really honored to meet you, Susie, and to be able to talk to your fine audience of such a subject. Thank you, all of you, and grateful, just very grateful.
Likewise, it's a privilege, Anthony. And just before we finish, can you tell us where we can find out more about yourself, what you do, your retreats?
Yes, indeed. A big reset is a retreat, and that they all happen at ASHA, Asha, and you can find out at asha.global about all the retreat schedules and things. it's all about raising consciousness and becoming more effective in life, like you said, becoming the
Hmm.
architect of your own soul and your life. And if you want to try breathing, you want to come closer, go to alchemyofbreath.com and you'll see a pop up, or if you scroll down a bit on your phone, you'll see an invitation to join our Breathe the World initiative, which is now in its 10th year. And you'll be able to breathe online at home, have headphones if you can, so you get better quality sound. And that'll be a 1 hour session, half an hour of its breathing as a little introduction. And then you'll get to breathe with several hundred other people as well, and you'll see what's happening to yourself, but also to other people. And I
Mm.
think one of the greatest ways to engage and create change is when we have the sustenance of community, and to understand that some of those deepest problems you carry inside that you might not feel comfortable to share are actually not personal. They
Mm.
belong to all of us. And it's really helpful to know that there are other people alongside us dealing with life the same way. So that's free every Sunday morning, 9:30 UK time and 5 p.m. UK time. And please make use of it. It's a great tool for support.
Excellent. Thank you. And I'll put the link to all those things and resources in the show notes. And thank you once again, Anthony. And thank you for listening to Let's Talk Transformation. But until next time, I'm going to leave you with this: breathe, lead with clarity, live with intention, and dare to transform from the inside out. Anthony, thank you.
Oh, bless you. Thank you, Susie.